Today, I'm presenting about my ongoing PhD research about the potential use of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy as an intervention for offenders, as an intervention for crime desistance. Now, there is something that I quite dislike about the title of my presentation. I'm starting to dislike it more and more, and it's the word offenders, really. And I do think it's a much better word than criminals. That's why I used it. But, you know, I really think we should focus on using more person-centered language. So I would now say a person involved in criminal behavior or a person who offends, because that way you really put their humanity and their personhoods at the forefront before what they did. And I think it's quite important that we stop labeling people and we stop referring to them as the worst thing that they ever did, especially if we expect them to rehabilitate and to build new and better lives for themselves. So yeah, there's that. I will most likely change the title in future presentations. But a little bit of a backstory. 2 years ago, I attended my first ever breaking convention here in Exeter. And in that period of my life, I was in the process of applying for PhD scholarships where I would be able to do my own research. And I actually received the email to invite me to my first PhD scholarship interview while I was here at Breaking Convention 2 years ago. So I went to that interview and I got it, yay. And then I started, and now I'm in my second year of the PhD. So it's a cute little full circle moment that I'm presenting about it now. So that's cool. But enough about me. I want to hear a bit from you now. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about psychedelics? I know it's early and you probably don't want to talk to me, but if no one wants to share anything, it's fine. Yeah, hope? That's good, thank you. Anyone else? Magic, interesting, yeah?
Legal consequences.
Yes, absolutely. We always have to kind of be overly cautious about that, don't we? But yeah, now let's have a bit of a think about how they might be used for crime desistance. First, I will talk a bit about what psychedelics are really, but I know that most people here already know that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, don't worry. So psychedelics are serotogenic hallucinogens, and they're really powerful psychoactive substances that alter perception and mood, and they also affect numerous cognitive processes. And generally, psychedelics are divided in two main categories. We have classic psychedelics and non-classic psychedelics. So for classic psychedelics, we are looking at magic mushrooms, where the active compound is psilocybin. We're looking at LSD. Also, it's Bicycle Day today, so happy birthday, LSD. And also ayahuasca and DMT. And the main thing that these compounds have in common is that they all work on the serotonin 2A receptor in the brain. And you can see here at the top, we have a serotonin molecule, and at the bottom, we have a psilocybin molecule. And we can see how they both look really similar. And there is mainly the reason why classic psychedelic molecules attach so easily onto the serotonin molecules in our brain. And then we also have non-classic psychedelics, such as MDMA and ketamine. Now, ketamine is known to also provoke profound alterations in consciousness, and MDMA also works in the serotonin system in the brain, and that's how they're also connected to psychedelics. Now, when it comes to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, these are usually classic psychotherapy sessions combined with some psychedelic dosing sessions in the presence of usually 2 psychotherapists or trained guides. And here we have an image from a trial at Imperial College London with David Arezzo, and we can see the participant is laying down on a comfy bed. They're wearing an eye mask, and we can also see the lighting in the room is quite mild, and there are some plants there. I really think, the more plants, the better we can have in these rooms. And that's because we know set and setting is the most important thing when it comes to psychedelics and psychedelic therapy, so that we can have positive results. Now, on the therapeutic benefits of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, we know from systematic reviews of clinical trials that are aimed to explore the outcomes of psychedelic-assisted therapy that they provide really compelling results in support of this treatment. And from more quantitative research, we know that they're really effective in treating depression, including treatment-resistant depression. So that's when somebody tries a few different antidepressant medications and nothing works, and psychedelic-assisted therapy seems to be really effective in those cases as well as substance misuse disorder and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder and eating disorders and so much more. And we also know from more qualitative results that they really improve quality of life on so many different levels and well-being in numerous aspects, and things like increased self-awareness and self-love and self-compassion, and we all kind of need a little bit more of that, don't we? And also self-control, which is particularly important in my research. We're looking at criminal behavior, and also, very importantly, a sense of interconnectedness. And I will speak about interconnectedness in more detail later on in the presentation. But it's this interconnectedness on so many different levels that I think is really, really important for crime desistance as well. And also enhancing people's emotional spectrums and providing them with better emotional processing abilities and a greater sense of purpose and of meaning in life, and a more positive and optimistic view about the world, as well as motivation and a commitment to change, which is also really important in my research, and also things like transcendental experiences and more. Now, a little bit of a backstory again, but it's the last backstory, I promise. So you can kind of see, looking at all of these benefits, why it was a few years ago that, I became really interested as a criminologist by psychedelic research, and I was really fascinated, and I was reading all these papers, and this one day, I was hanging out with my friends, and I was really, really excitingly telling them about all of these benefits. Did you know this? Did you know that? And then I sort of stopped and I told them, guys, only imagine if politicians took mushrooms instead of coke, the world would be so much better, wouldn't it? And then I had this sort of light bulb moment, and I thought, hang on, what if people who commit crime were to take psychedelics? What would happen then? Would that help? So that was really the beginning of my research and of this work. And then I put together the proposal, and the rest is history. So a little bit about desistance and what it actually means. So desistance from crime is the process through which somebody ceases their involvement in criminal behavior. And we look at this as a process. I'm emphasizing that this is a process, not just a simple binary going from a state of offending behavior to non-offending behavior. It's definitely a process. And we find that personal narratives play an important role when it comes to desistance from crime. So these are the stories that people tell themselves about themselves and the world, and how their past relates to their current offending behavior. And those are quite important in this process of desistance. And people who manage to successfully desist from crime experience this cognitive change where they form a new pro-social and conventional identity that is no longer compatible with a life of criminality. And the most important cognitive change that is essential in this process is a cognitive readiness and an openness to positive change, to positive transformation. But we find that usually just an openness to positive change is not enough for desistance to successfully take place. So what's also really important following from that is a hook for change or a series of hooks for change. What are hooks for change? Well, we refer to hooks for change as factors that are external to the individual, factors in the environment that can also impact the criminal potential. And here, for example, we have marriage is a good hook for change, that usually people who get married tend to be more likely to cease their involvement in crime, or getting into education, things like that, external things to the individual that make them more likely to stop their involvement in crime. So, psychedelics and crime. In regards to psychedelics and crime, recent studies suggest that there is a negative relationship between psychedelic use and criminal behavior. Now, these studies, the recent studies, analyzed nationally representative data from the survey of drug use and crime in the United States, and they tested the relationship between psychedelic use and past year arrests for various crimes. And they found that lifetime use of some psychedelic substances was associated with lowered odds of arrest for various crimes. Now here, talking about lifetime use of psychedelics, really we mean naturalistic use. So these studies didn't look at people engaging in psychedelic therapy, but naturalistic use of psychedelics. But this, I think, is a pretty good indication as well. And then we also have some studies from the 60s that looked at this, and they found that LSD contributed to really positive changes in people's personality and behavior, like positive shifts in values, and they started to confront their repressed emotions and gain insights into how their past experiences relate to their current circumstances. And I think it's important to emphasize, in the newer studies that are looking at statistics, especially psilocybin was found to serve as a protective factor against antisocial and criminal behavior. Then from the 60s, I didn't put it on the slide, but we also have the Concord prison experiment that Timothy Leary conducted, where he gave psilocybin to people in prison. Now, the findings of that study are a bit mixed, which is why I didn't include it here, but I think it's extremely, extremely important to think about that study as well, because it seemed to have really positive results initially. It's just that, however, years later, in 1998, when Rick Doblin conducted a follow-up study on the Concord prison experiment, he found that recidivism rates didn't improve in that cohort. Years on, people still went on to offending, but the conclusion of that was really not necessarily that the psychedelic intervention didn't work, but the environmental factors when people came out of prison didn't change. They still went back to the same environments. People who go to prison are still less likely to get jobs after they come out of prison, and generally, people who go to prison are more likely to reoffend than people who don't go to prison. So if you thought incarceration works, it doesn't. And we do know that. So I still think it's a really important study, and I think it should definitely not be dismissed, even if recidivism rates didn't drop drastically over time. But yeah, currently, with the psychedelic research renaissance, it has not yet led to any controlled trials of psychedelic-assisted therapy in a criminal justice population, and that's where I come in, and that's what I'm planning to do. So, what is my rationale? Why I think psychedelic therapy could be an effective intervention for crime desistance? I'm still, working on the full explanation of my theoretical framework, but firstly, I want to really talk a bit more about interconnectedness, because as I said, I do think this is a really important aspect. So we know that psychedelics enhance interconnectedness, facilitate interconnectedness on many, many different levels, from the molecular level to the cosmic level. So on the more molecular scale, they enhance connections between different neurons in the brain, creating new synapses in the brain. There is some evidence suggesting that they are even creating new neurons in the brain. And then a bit zooming out from that, as we can see in the very well-known images there, they create new connections between different parts of the brain that don't usually talk to each other. And then on the whole individual level, I think, you know, they really provide a sense of interconnectedness with your own self. They help you connect your authentic self better. Then in relationships, they enhance connections with other people in our lives. They enhance connections with nature and with the whole planet, and really with the whole universe all together. So I'm looking at that, and I think it's quite relevant for this research as well. And also neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is also known as brain plasticity, and this is the brain's, the nervous system's ability to change its activity in response to stimuli and new experiences by reorganizing its connections and its functions. And psychedelics are known to disrupt or even reset the default mode network in the brain, which encodes negative cognitions. And thinking about the previous slide where I talked about the process of desistance and the importance of these cognitive shifts that people experience when they desist from crime, I think, you know, with age, considering that neuroplasticity decreases, you know, quite drastically with age, I think in that sense, offending, especially in adulthood after 25 years old, is characterized by this sense of stuckness, of people not being able to see a different way of just carrying on with what they've known. And I think the neuroplasticity that is facilitated by psychedelics could be really helpful in unstucking that stuckness. Then I'm also looking at the frontal lobe, which is responsible for executive functioning in the brain. Executive functioning involves things like decision-making and abstract reasoning and inhibiting inappropriate behavior, also things like attention, concentration, anticipation, and planning. And when it comes to deficits in these executive functions in the brain, some of these are also considered to be risk factors for criminality. Things like impulsivity and poor moral reasoning and emotional dysregulation. So I'm thinking that, you know, considering that psychedelics work within the frontal lobe, there might be, you know, with the right therapeutic approach, maybe the executive function deficits in the brain can be sort of adjusted, for lack of a better word. So, no, actually, I'm going to go back there for a bit. So yeah, this is still not finalized, of course. I'm still trying to finalize my thinking and my rationale here, and I'm in the process of putting together a theoretical mechanism of action that explains why psychedelic therapy could help people stop committing crime. And, you know, I'm not far from sort of finishing that thought process, but just a few things to, you know, wrap up. And then I'm planning for this to be my first publication in a journal article that I'm doing in my PhD, where I explain the theoretical mechanism behind this. So, you know, if you find this interesting, connect with me and find out when I'm going to publish it, because I'm planning to send it for publication by the end of the year. So there's that. So how I'm planning to do my PhD research, I'm looking at this PhD research as a feasibility study with the view to conduct a mixed methods, longitudinal, randomized control trial in the future after I finish my PhD. But this is really exploratory, and it will inform all my future research because I'm just getting started. You know, I don't see not researching in this area anytime in the foreseeable future. So it's only the beginning. And for my PhD, I will be using mixed methods because I think it just combines the best of both worlds of quantitative and qualitative research, and I think they go really, really well together. And I've planned 3 different stages of data collection. Firstly, I want to document the lived experiences of people who used to offend, who used to be involved in criminal behavior, and then they undertook psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, or they participated in psychedelic retreats, and as a result of those psychedelic experiences, they stopped their involvement in crime. So I'll be interviewing them and administering some questionnaires as well. And then I'm planning to actually develop a therapeutic, intervention protocol for this. And ideally, at the final stage, I will be speaking to gatekeepers and prospective participants, so essentially going to the Ministry of Justice and the Probation Service and presenting my results to them and trying to convince them to allow me to conduct, the randomized control trial in the future. Now, this is how I propose my research anyway. Now that I'm actually in my 2nd year, I'm finding by discussions with my supervisors that I might have been overly ambitious with all of the different stages for a 3-year PhD, but I do tend to be quite overly ambitious with things like that. So I might have to adjust and maybe drop one of the stages, but we'll see. I will definitely, stage A is the main essence of the study. So I will see after that. Right, getting to the end, I like to end any presentation about drugs with a little bit of education and harm reduction reminder. I do think, especially by listening to all of these benefits, psychedelics sound amazing, and they are pretty amazing. But I do think it's important to, educate ourselves, and before we take any substances, to just make sure we are aware of all the different benefits, as well as risks and harm reduction advice associated with each of these substances. So you have various different websites. You can go on the drug science website to educate yourself about all the different drugs. And also the Drugs and Me website is pretty good for drug interactions. And we have this table. So as I like to say, leave the mixing to the DJ. I do know some combinations are quite fun, candy flipping, hippie flipping, flippy flipping. I know. But, as nice as some combinations can be, and some of them are low risk, so you can definitely do that safely, but others can be quite dangerous, so please do consult, education and tables like this to see which combinations are, synergetic and which ones might kill you, so you should kind of make the difference first. And, do bear in mind that when it comes to psychedelics, if you have a genetic predisposition to psychosis or schizophrenia, you might be more likely to develop this from psychedelics. It's just a bit of an increased risk there. So I'm not saying don't do it, but just keep that in mind. Do it safely. Go ahead with caution. Right, and I have references as well. And that's me. Thank you so much for listening. You can connect with me with all those places. Thank you. Yeah. No worries.